The galaxy had rankings for everything: strength, intelligence, combat prowess, technological advancement. Every species measured against every other species in endless competitions that determined worth, value, and survival. Humans had entered the galactic stage only 3 decades ago, and their ranking reflected their newcomer status. 91st place, dead last among all known sapient species. Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of Station Gamma 7, watching the swirling nebula outside paint the darkness with streaks of purple and gold. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the datapad containing her assignment. Around her, other beings moved through the corridor with purpose. Tall Valorians with their crystalline skin that reflected light like living diamonds. Swift Kretar with their 6 limbs and predatory grace. Even a pair of Mothic scholars floated past, their gaseous forms contained in elegant environmental suits. None of them looked at her. Why would they? She was human. 91st. The datapad buzzed again, and Sarah forced herself to read the message one more time. It made no sense. No sense at all. She was a xenobiologist, yes, but a junior one. Fresh out of the academy with decent grades, but nothing spectacular. Her research papers had been published in minor journals. Her fieldwork consisted of cataloging bacteria on uninhabited moons. Nothing in her record suggested she was qualified for this. Yet here it was, an official summons from the Apex Council themselves. The Apex, the first species, the oldest civilization in the known galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still figuring out fire. Their technology was so advanced that other species treated it like magic. Their military had never lost a battle. Their territory encompassed 12,000 star systems. They were ranked first in everything, always without exception. And they wanted her. Sarah walked through the station's main concourse, her boots clicking on the polished floor. Holographic advertisements floated in the air, hawking everything from plasma weapons to vacation packages on Paradise Worlds. Most were in Galactic Common, but a few had human translations, always smaller and tucked away in corners. The galaxy had adapted to accommodate humanity, barely. It was like someone had begrudgingly added a children's menu to a fancy restaurant. The Apex Embassy occupied an entire section of the station. Sarah had never been inside before. Few humans had. The entrance was guarded by security drones that hummed with barely contained energy. They scanned her credentials, and one spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Sarah Chun. Expected. Proceed to Conference Room 7. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Inside, everything was white and silver with flowing organic curve that suggested the architecture had been grown rather than built. Sarah felt suddenly shabby in her standard-issue uniform. She followed the illuminated path on the floor, her heart hammering. Conference Room 7 was circular, with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time map of the galaxy. Stars glittered like scattered diamonds, with different colors indicating different territories. The Apex holdings glowed golden, dominating nearly a quarter of the display. 3 Apex waited for her. Sarah had seen Apex before, but only in recordings. In person, they were even more intimidating. They stood on 2 legs like humans, but that was where the similarity ended. Their bodies were covered in overlapping scales that shifted colors from deep blue to violet, depending on how the light hit them. They had 4 arms, each ending in hands with 6 fingers. Their faces were angular and sharp, with large eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. Crests of bone and scale ran from their foreheads down their spines, and when they moved, it was with perfect, fluid precision. The one in the center spoke first. Her voice was surprisingly melodic, with harmonics that suggested multiple vocal cords working in concert. Sarah Chun, we are grateful you accepted our invitation. Sarah swallowed hard. I didn't think I had a choice. The Apex on the left made a sound like wind through reeds. Laughter, Sarah realized. Honest. Unexpected from diplomatic briefings about humans. Most claim you dissemble constantly. I'm not a diplomat, Sarah said. I'm a xenobiologist, and not a very important one. So why am I here? The center Apex gestured with her upper right hand, and a hologram materialized in the air between them. It showed a planet, blue and green, with white clouds swirling across its surface. Beautiful and Earth-like. This is Sanctuary, the apex said. It is our most carefully guarded world. No other species has ever been permitted to visit. The security protocols protecting it could repel a fleet of 10,000 warships. Sarah stared at the planet. Okay, why are you telling me this? Because we need you to go there. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. That's insane. You just said no one else has ever been allowed there. Why would you make an exception for a human? We're ranked 91st. We're barely even considered people by half the galaxy. The third apex spoke for the first time. His voice was deeper, with a rumbling quality that Sarah felt in her chest. Rankings are tools for governance and resource allocation. They are not measures of worth. We do not share the prejudices of lesser species. Then, why do you need me specifically? The center apex manipulated the hologram, zooming in on a specific continent. Green forest appeared, vast and untouched. Sanctuary is where we raise our young. All apex children spend their first 15 years there, learning and growing in an environment designed for optimal development. It is sacred to us. No technology beyond basic tools is permitted. No weapons. No interference. She paused, and Sarah noticed her scales darkening slightly. 3 months ago, something changed. Our children began behaving strangely. They stopped eating properly. They became withdrawn, anxious. Our caretakers attempted to help, but nothing worked. The children grew worse. They stopped sleeping. Some stopped speaking entirely. The image shifted to show young apex. There were smaller versions of the adults with oversized eyes and scales that looked softer, less defined. In the hologram, they huddled together, trembling. Sarah felt her heart clench. We sent our best specialists, the apex continued. Doctors, psychologists, experts in child development. Nothing helped. If anything, our children reacted with fear to our presence. We attempted sending other species to assist. Valorians, Kretar, even Zephan empaths. All were rejected violently. And you think I can help? Sarah asked. I study microorganisms, not child psychology. We have reviewed the records of every xenobiologist in the galaxy, the left apex said. Your work caught our attention, not because it was groundbreaking, but because of how you approached it. You spent 3 years studying fungal colonies on Kepler, 442F. Your observations noted that the colonies thrived when you maintained distance and observed without interference. When you intervened to help struggling growths, they died. Sarah nodded slowly. They had their own ecosystem. My help disrupted it. I learned to watch and understand before acting. Precisely, the center apex said. Our children are suffering, but everything we do to help makes it worse. We believe the problem is us. We are too much, too intense, too powerful. Our presence frightens them in their current state. The deep-voiced apex leaned forward. We need someone who can observe without overwhelming them. Someone ranked low enough that our children will not instinctively fear their presence. Someone patient and careful. Someone 91st, Sarah whispered. Yes. The galaxy map above them slowly rotated, a reminder of how vast and complex everything was. Sarah thought about those young apex, scared and alone on their paradise world. She thought about how it felt to be ranked last, to be dismissed and underestimated everywhere you went. If I go, she said carefully, I'll need complete authority. No interference from your specialists. No remote monitoring beyond basic safety checks. If your theory is correct and you're the problem, then you need to stay away and let me work. The three apex exchanged glances. Some wordless communication passed between them, too quick for Sarah to catch. Finally, the center one nodded. Agreed. You will have whatever resources you require. Your authority on Sanctuary will be absolute. We ask only one thing. What? Save our children. Please. The word please from an apex, spoken with such naked vulnerability, made Sarah's breath catch. These were the most powerful beings in the galaxy, feared and respected by everyone, and they were begging a 91st-ranked human for help. "I'll do everything I can," Sarah said. The transport ship that took her to Sanctuary was small and sleek, piloted by an AI that spoke only when necessary. Sarah spent the 3-day journey reviewing everything the Apex had given her. Medical scans of the children, behavioral reports, environmental data from Sanctuary, security footage showing the progression of symptoms. The children had been fine until 3 months ago. Then, seemingly overnight, everything changed. They stopped playing their usual games. They began gathering in tight groups, always watching the sky. When adult Apex tried to comfort them, the children fled or froze in place, trembling. Sarah watched one video over and over. A young Apex, maybe equivalent to a human 6-year-old, sat alone by a stream. A caretaker approached slowly, speaking softly. The child's head snapped up, and the fear in those large eyes was unmistakable. Not danger fear, not stranger fear, something else. Something that made the child back away until they fell into the water, then scramble out and run into the forest. What could make a child afraid of their own caretaker? Sanctuary appeared in the viewport, and Sarah pressed her face close to the glass. The planet was even more beautiful up close. The AI guided the ship down through the atmosphere, and Sarah watched clouds part around them. Below, endless forests stretched to the horizons, broken only by rivers and lakes that sparkled in the sun. The landing zone was a simple clearing. No buildings, no structures beyond a small supply cache. The moment Sarah stepped off the ship, the AI spoke one last time. Communication beacon active. Emergency recall available at any time. Good luck, Sarah-chun. Then the ship lifted off, and Sarah was alone. The air was warm and humid, filled with the sounds of alien birds and insects. The forest smelled like cinnamon and fresh earth. Sarah shouldered her pack and consulted her datapad. The nearest group of children was 2 kilometers in northwest. She started walking. The Apex had been truthful about the no-technology rule. Sarah had only basic equipment: a tent, food supplies, water purification tablets, a medical kit, and her datapad loaded with observation logs. No weapons, no communication devices beyond the emergency beacon, no recording equipment. She was a xenobiologist going to study the most precious resource in Apex society, and all she had was her training and her instincts. The forest was dense, but navigable. Sarah moved slowly, careful not to disturb things unnecessarily. She had learned long ago that field work required patience. Rush in, and you'd scare away everything worth studying. Move too fast, and you'd miss the details that mattered. After an hour, she heard voices. Young voices speaking in Apex dialect. Sarah crouched behind a large tree trunk and peered around carefully. There were 12 of them, young Apex, ranging in size from small to medium. They sat in a circle in a sunny clearing, but they weren't playing. They were watching the sky, their heads tilted back, absolutely still. Sarah watched them for a long time. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Finally, she stepped into the clearing. "Hello," she said in Galactic Common. 12 heads snapped toward her. 12 pairs of eyes went wide. But they didn't run. Instead, the children stared at her with something that looked like curiosity. One of them, slightly larger than the others, took a tentative step forward. "What are you?" the child asked. Their voice was high and uncertain. "I'm human," Sarah said, keeping her voice gentle. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to help." "Human," the child repeated, testing the word. 91st. Sarah smiled despite herself. "That's right. Dead last." The children looked at each other. Then, slowly, they began to approach. Not running, not afraid, just curious. They circled around her, examining her with their large eyes. One reached out and touched her arm gently, then pulled back as if surprised by how warm her skin felt. "You're so small," one whispered. "You have only 2 arms," another observed. "Why is your skin so soft?" a third asked. Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to their level. I know I look different, but I'm here because your caretakers are worried about you. They say you've been scared lately. Can you tell me why? The children went quiet. The largest one, who seemed to be their leader, looked back at the sky. When they spoke, their voice was barely audible. They're coming back. Who's coming back? Sarah asked. The child didn't answer. Instead, they pointed at the sky with one small hand. Sarah looked up, but all she saw were clouds and the distant sun. I don't understand, she said. The young apex looked at her with eyes full of ancient fear. The ones who came before, the ones who made everything, they're coming back, and when they do, everything will end. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm air. The child spoke with the certainty of absolute belief. This wasn't a game or a story. To them, this was real. How do you know they're coming back? Sarah asked carefully. We can feel them, another child said. In our heads. They're calling. Calling for what? The children looked at each other, and Sarah saw fear flicker across their young faces. The leader spoke again, their voice trembling. Calling us home, to where we really came from, before we forgot. Sarah stayed in the clearing as the sun moved across the sky. The children eventually returned to their circle, watching the clouds with that same intense focus. She didn't push them for more information. Instead, she set up her tent at the edge of the clearing and began taking notes. The children weren't just scared. They were experiencing something real to them, even if the adults couldn't detect it. Sarah thought about her fungal colonies on Kepler 442f. She had almost missed the patterns in their growth because she'd been looking for the wrong things. She'd expected them to behave like Earth fungi. Only when she stopped imposing her expectations and simply observed had she understood. The apex adults were doing the same thing. They saw scared children and assumed trauma, illness, psychological breakdown. They'd brought in experts who tried to fix the children, never considering that maybe the children weren't broken at all. Maybe they were experiencing something the adults couldn't. As darkness fell, the children finally stopped watching the sky. They moved to a shelter woven from branches and leaves, grouping together for warmth. Sarah started a small fire and heated her meal. The children watched her from their shelter, their eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Are you afraid? One called out. Of what? Sarah asked. The ones who are coming. Sarah considered the question seriously. I don't know what's coming, but I do know that fear is usually worse than reality. Most of the scary things I've worried about never happened, and the ones that did happen, I dealt with them when they came. The child thought about this. The caretakers say nothing is coming. They say we're imagining things. Maybe you are, Sarah said, or maybe you're sensing something they can't. Either way, I believe that you're afraid. That's real, even if the threat isn't. Another child spoke up. You're different from the others. You don't try to make us feel better. Would it help if I did? No. Then I won't waste your time with it. The children whispered among themselves. Then the leader emerged from the shelter and approached Sarah's fire. They sat down across from her, scales gleaming in the firelight. Will you stay? The child asked. As long as you need me to. Even when they come? Sarah looked into those large, frightened eyes and made a decision. Especially then, the child's scales rippled with something that might have been relief. The caretakers ran away. When we tried to tell them, they brought strangers who asked many questions but didn't listen to the answers. Then they all left. They were too scared to stay. I'm not your caretaker, Sarah said, and I'm definitely not brave. But I am curious, and I want to understand what's happening to you. So yes, I'll stay. The child reached out and touched Sarah's hand. Their scales were warm and dry like sun-heated stone. Thank you, 91st. Sarah smiled. You can call me Sarah. Sarah, the child repeated. I'm called Kesfix, but you can call me Kes. Nice to meet you, Kes. The young apex stayed by the fire for a while longer, simply sitting in comfortable silence. Other children slowly emerged from the shelter, drawn by curiosity or perhaps by Kes's presence. They sat in a wider circle, watching Sarah with interest but no fear. This was progress, Sarah thought. Small but real. The children weren't running. They were communicating. That was more than the Apex specialist had managed in 3 months. But as she looked at their young faces, still tilted occasionally toward the darkening sky, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. These children believed something was coming, something that terrified them, and she had no idea what it was or how to protect them from it. She was 91st, dead last, the least qualified person in the galaxy for this task. But she was also the only one the children would talk to. Sarah added wood to the fire and prepared for a long night. Above them, the stars began to appear, thousands upon thousands of lights in the darkness. Somewhere up there, the Apex Council waited for her report. Somewhere up there, her own people probably wondered what she was doing on a forbidden world. Down here, 12 frightened children watched the sky and waited for something to come. And Sarah, armed with nothing but patience and determination, waited with them. Sarah woke to the sound of singing. It took her a moment to orient herself, emerging from her tent into the pre-dawn light. The 12 children stood in their circle, their voices raised in harmony. The song had no words, just sounds that rose and fell in patterns that seemed both random and purposeful. It made Sarah's skin prickle. Kess noticed her watching and broke away from the group. The other children continued singing without pause, their eyes closed, bodies swaying slightly. "What is that?" Sarah asked quietly. "The answer song," Kess said. "We sing it every morning now." "Answer to what?" Kess's scales darkened to deep indigo. "To them. They call, and we answer, so they know we hear." Sarah recorded the song on her datapad, though she suspected no recording could capture the strange harmonics the children produced. When she played it back, it sounded flat and wrong. The children finished their song as the sun broke over the horizon, then scattered to forage for breakfast. Sarah spent the morning watching them. They moved through the forest with confidence, gathering fruits and edible plants. The Apex had designed sanctuary to be safe for their young. There were no large predators, no poisonous plants, nothing that could seriously harm a child. It was a paradise, carefully engineered over thousands of years. Yet the children still looked over their shoulders constantly, still searched the sky between every task. 2 more groups of children arrived before noon. 23 more young Apex, all showing the same symptoms. They watched Sarah with cautious interest, whispering to each other. Kess seemed to be explaining who she was, and gradually the new arrivals relaxed. By mid-afternoon, Sarah had 35 young Apex in the clearing. They ranged in age from what she estimated as 5 to 12 in human years. The older ones took care of the younger ones, showing a level of responsibility that impressed her. When a small child tripped and scraped their knee, an older one immediately cleaned the wound and applied a poultice made from local plants. "You're good at taking care of each other," Sarah observed. An older child named Zorkith nodded. "We have to be. The caretakers are gone. We're all we have now. Do you know why the caretakers left?" Zorkith's scales flickered through several colors before settling on a muted green. "They said we were sick, that our minds were broken. They brought healers who wanted to give us medicine to stop the voices. And did you take it?" "Some did. It made them sleep, but the voices came in their dreams instead. Louder, angrier. When they woke up, they couldn't speak anymore." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Where are those children now?" Zorkith pointed deeper into the forest. "The quiet place. Well, the ones who can't answer anymore stay. Can you take me there?" The older Apex children exchanged glances. Finally, Zorkith nodded. "Kess should come too. They trust Kess." The 3 of them left the clearing and walked into the forest. The path wound through massive trees whose trunks were wider than Sarah's apartment back on Earth. Bioluminescent moss grew on the northern side of each tree, providing natural navigation. Everything about Sanctuary was designed to teach and nurture. After 20 minutes, they reached another clearing. This one was quieter, shadowed by a dense canopy. 15 young Apex sat scattered around the space. They didn't move when Sarah approached. Didn't react at all. "They're catatonic," Sarah whispered. Kess approached one of the still children and touched their shoulder gently. "This is Ventar. They were the first to take the medicine." They haven't moved in 6 weeks. Sarah knelt beside the child. Their eyes were open but unfocused. Their scales had faded to a pale gray. Breathing was shallow but steady. She pulled out her medical scanner and ran it over Ventar. The readings showed normal physical health. Neurologically, however, something was very wrong. The medicine suppressed their ability to respond to the voices, Sarah said slowly, thinking out loud. But the voices didn't stop. They just couldn't process them anymore. It's like plugging your ears, but still feeling the vibration of a sound. Can you help them? Zorkith asked. Sarah looked at the 15 motionless children. I don't know, but I'm going to try. They returned to the main clearing. Sarah sent a brief report to the Apex Council via her emergency beacon. She kept it factual and avoided speculation. 35 children responsive and communicating. 15 unresponsive due to medication. More information needed. Request no further interference. The response came back within an hour. A single line of text, acknowledged. We trust your judgment. That night, Sarah sat with Kess by the fire. The other children had settled into their shelters, but Kess seemed reluctant to sleep. Tell me about the voices, Sarah said. When did they start? Kess stared into the flames. 3 months ago, we were playing the hunting game. You know, where we pretend to stalk prey through the forest. I was hiding behind a rock when I heard it, like someone calling my name, but from very far away. I looked around, but no one was there. What did it sound like? Kess struggled to find words. Like remembering something you forgot. Like recognizing a smell from when you were very small. It felt old, ancient, and it knew me. Did it scare you? Not at first. I thought maybe it was part of growing up. The caretakers tell us stories about how we change as we get older, about the voices of our ancestors guiding us. I thought that was what it was. But it wasn't. Kess's scales darkened. Ancestors' voices are supposed to be comforting. These voices are demanding. They want something from us. They're calling us somewhere, and they're getting impatient. Sarah added more wood to the fire. Kess, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you think these voices are real, or do you think they might be your imagination? The young Apex looked at her with those large, luminous eyes. When you were small, did you ever have a dream that felt so real you weren't sure if you were awake or asleep? Yes, these voices are like that. Maybe they're in my head. Maybe they're coming from outside. I don't know the difference anymore, but they feel real, and they're getting stronger every day. Sarah nodded slowly. This was useful information. The children weren't delusional. They were experiencing something that fell into an uncomfortable gray area between internal and external perception, something that didn't fit into neat categories. She thought again of her fungal colonies. They had communicated through chemical signals that humans couldn't directly perceive. Only by careful analysis had Sarah detected the patterns. What if the children were perceiving something similar? Something the adult Apex had lost the ability to sense? I want to try something, Sarah said. Tomorrow, during your answer song, I want to be there with you. Really there, not just watching from the side. Can you teach me? Kess tilted their head, confused. You want to sing with us? I want to try to hear what you're hearing, or feel what you're feeling. I can't help you if I don't understand. Humans are different. You might not be able to. Maybe not. But I have to try. Kess considered this, then nodded. Okay, but Sarah, if you do hear them, they might not want to let you go. The warning made Sarah's blood run cold. But she forced herself to smile. Then, you'll have to help me come back. The next morning, Sarah stood in the circle with the children. 35 young Apex surrounded her, their scales gleaming in the early light. Kess stood beside her, patient and encouraging. Close your eyes, Kess instructed. Listen to the forest first. The birds, the wind, the stream. Let those sounds fill you. Sarah obeyed. The forest was alive with noise. Chirps and rustles and the distant thunder of a waterfall. She focused on breathing, letting the sounds wash over her. Now listen deeper, Kess continued. Past the sound you can hear, to the sound you can feel. The children began to hum. Low, resonant notes that Sarah felt in her chest. The humming grew, harmonics layering upon each other in complex patterns. Sarah's eyes wanted to open, but She kept them shut. The humming changed, became the answer song. Sarah felt the vibrations in her bones, in her teeth, in the base of her skull. It was overwhelming and strange and utterly alien. Then, suddenly, there was something else. A presence. Vast and ancient and impossibly distant, yet somehow intimate. Like a memory she'd never had. Like a thought in a language she didn't speak. It pressed against her awareness, curious and patient and utterly inhuman. Sarah gasped, and her eyes flew open. The children continued singing, unaware of her distress. The presence faded, but didn't disappear entirely. It lingered at the edge of her consciousness, watching. When the song ended, Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard, her heart racing. Kes knelt beside her immediately. "You felt them," the young apex said. "Not a question." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "What are they?" "We don't know. But they've been waiting for us for a very long time." Sarah spent the rest of the day recovering. The presence had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. It hadn't been malicious exactly, but it had been so utterly alien that every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to get away. The children watched her with sympathy. They'd been living with this for 3 months. No wonder they were terrified. By evening, Sarah had composed herself enough to think analytically. She pulled out her datapad and began making notes. The presence felt ancient. The children said it was calling them home. The apex were the oldest known species in the galaxy, but they'd never mentioned anything like this in their history. Unless they didn't know. Sarah opened a communication channel to the Apex Council. The response was almost immediate. The same 3 apex from her initial briefing appeared as holograms around her tent. "Sarah Chun," the center one said, "we received your report. 15 children unresponsive. This is worse than we feared." "I think I know what's causing it," Sarah said. "But you're not going to like my theory." "Tell us." Sarah took a deep breath. "Your children are experiencing contact with something. I don't know what it is, but it's real. I felt it myself this morning. It's trying to communicate with them." The 3 apex went very still. "That is impossible," the left one said. "Our sensor networks cover this entire planet. Nothing exists here except the children and the indigenous life we introduced." "Then, your sensors can't detect it," Sarah said. "Or it's not here physically. But it's reaching your children somehow, and it's causing them psychological trauma because they don't understand what's happening." The deep-voiced apex leaned forward. "What is the nature of this contact?" "I don't know exactly. It feels like an invitation, or a summons." The children describe it as being called home. They sing to it every morning, answering its call. "Answering what call?" The center apex demanded. "We are their home. Sanctuary is their home. There's nowhere else." "That's just it," Sarah said. "The children say it's calling them to where they really came from, before they forgot." Silence. The 3 apex exchanged glances that lasted too long. Finally, the center one spoke, her voice careful. "Sarah Chun, what we are about to tell you is known only to the Council. It is our most carefully guarded secret. If we share it with you, you must swear never to reveal it to anyone." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I swear." The hologram shifted, showing a star chart. Ancient and complex, with notations in a script Sarah didn't recognize. The center apex spoke with the weight of millennia. "We were not always called the apex. 50,000 years ago, we had another name. We do not speak it anymore, because to do so invites questions we cannot answer. Questions about where we came from before we arrived in this galaxy." "You're not native to this galaxy?" Sarah asked, shocked. "No, we traveled here from somewhere else. Somewhere so distant that our oldest records cannot accurately describe the journey. When we arrived, we were fleeing something. We do not remember what. Our ancestors deliberately erased those memories from our species' collective consciousness. They believed forgetting was the only way to survive." The implications crashed into Sarah like a wave. "The voices. They're from where you originally came from, whatever you were fleeing." "It would seem so," the left apex said. "But how is this possible? We fled over 50,000 years ago. We crossed intergalactic space. We erased every trace of our origin. How could anything follow us across such distance and time? Maybe it didn't follow you, Sarah said slowly. Maybe it's been waiting for you to remember. The three apex went very still again. The deep-voiced one spoke. You believe this entity has been searching for us for 50,000 years or longer. Kess said the presence feels patient, ancient, like it's been waiting a very long time. Sarah pulled up her notes. Your children are experiencing these voices because they're young. Their minds haven't been shaped by your culture yet. They're still connected to something primal in your species, something the adults lost when you deliberately forgot your origins. The center apex's scales rippled through colors Sarah had never seen before. Fear, she realized. Pure, existential fear. If what you say is true, the apex said quietly, then our children are being called back to the place we fled from. Back to whatever we feared so much that we erased our own history to escape it. Yes, Sarah said. That's what I think. Then, they are in terrible danger. Maybe, or maybe your ancestors were wrong. Maybe whatever this is isn't dangerous. Maybe it's just trying to make contact, to reconnect with part of your species that got away. The left apex made a harsh sound. You suggest we simply allow this entity to communicate with our children, to potentially reclaim them? I'm suggesting that fighting it isn't working. The children who took medication to suppress the voices are catatonic. The ones who are awake are terrified because they don't understand what's happening. But they're not in physical danger. Not yet. What do you propose? The center apex asked. Sarah stood up, her mind racing. Give me time. Let me work with the children. Help them understand what's happening instead of fighting it. If this presence is intelligent, maybe we can communicate with it. Figure out what it wants. And if what it wants is our children, then we'll deal with that when we have to. But right now, fear is the enemy. Fear is what's hurting the children. Knowledge is how we fight fear. The three apex were silent for a long time. Finally, the center one nodded slowly. Very well. You have authority to proceed as you see fit. But, Sarah Chun, understand this. If our children are harmed, if this entity poses a threat to them, we will not hesitate to act. We will sterilize that entire planet if necessary to protect them. I understand, Sarah said. The holograms vanished. Sarah sat in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of the forest. Somewhere nearby, 35 children slept, their dreams filled with voices from a place their ancestors had fled 50,000 years ago. Sarah was 91st in the galactic rankings. A nobody, a junior xenobiologist who studied fungus on dead moons. And now she was the only thing standing between the most powerful species in the galaxy and an entity that had been waiting longer than human civilization had existed. She looked up at the stars and wondered which one the apex had originally come from. Wondered what could be so terrifying that an entire species would choose to forget their own origins. Tomorrow, she would help the children try to communicate back. Not just answer the call, but ask questions. Seek understanding. It was a risk. A massive, potentially catastrophic risk. But it was the only path forward Sarah could see. She laid down in her tent and tried to sleep. The presence lingered at the edge of her awareness, patient and waiting. Ancient and unknowable. She wondered if it knew she was here. Wondered if it cared about the small human who had stumbled into a 50,000-year-old mystery. The answer came in her dreams. Not words, but a feeling, recognition, acknowledgement, and something that might have been approval. She woke with the dawn, knowing that everything was about to change. Sarah gathered the children after breakfast. All 35 of them sat in a large circle while she stood in the center, trying to figure out how to explain her plan. I spoke with the Apex Council last night, she began. They told me something important, something secret that your people have been hiding for a very long time. The children leaned forward, interested. Kessa's scales brightened. What's secret? Your people aren't from this galaxy. 50,000 years ago, your ancestors came from somewhere else. Somewhere so far away that the journey took generations. And when they arrived here, they deliberately forgot where they came from. They erased their own memories because they were running away from something. The clearing went silent. The children stared at her with wide eyes. Finally, an older child named Tixvera spoke up. Running from what? They don't remember. That was the point. They forgot so completely that even their records don't say. Sarah sat down, bringing herself to their level. But I think the voices you're hearing are from that place, from where your ancestors originally came from. Why are they calling us now? Zorkith asked. It's been 50,000 years. I don't know. Maybe they've been calling the whole time, and only now are some of your people young enough to hear it. Maybe time works differently for them. Maybe they just found you. Sarah looked at each child in turn. But I think the only way to find out is to ask them. Kessa's scales flickered through several colors. Ask them? How? They don't speak words. No, but they respond to your answer song. That means there's communication happening, even if it's not language as we understand it. Today, I want to try something different. Instead of just answering their call, I want you to try sending them a message. A question. What question? Tixvera asked. Sarah considered carefully. Ask them who they are. Ask them what they want. Ask them why they're calling. The children exchanged nervous glances. Kess spoke for the group. What if they don't like us asking questions? What if it makes them angry? Then, we'll deal with that, Sarah said. But right now, not knowing is what's hurting you. The fear of the unknown is worse than almost anything real. At least if we know what we're dealing with, we can make informed choices. The caretakers wouldn't approve, an older child said. They told us to ignore the voices, to push them away. The caretakers aren't here. I am. And I'm telling you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is face what scares you and ask questions. Sarah stood up. I'm not going to force anyone to participate. If you're too frightened, you can stay on the edge of the circle. But for those who want answers, I'll be right here with you. The children whispered among themselves for several minutes. Sarah waited patiently, letting them make their own decision. Finally, Kess stood up. I'll do it. I'm tired of being afraid without knowing why. One by one, other children stood. Within minutes, all 35 were on their feet. Even the youngest ones, who barely understood what was happening, stood because the others did. Sarah felt a swell of pride. These children had more courage than most adults she knew. They formed a circle, with Sarah in the middle. This time, she would try to act as a bridge. Human minds processed information differently than Apex minds. Maybe her presence could help translate or interpret whatever response came. Start with the answer song, Sarah instructed. Let them know you're here and listening. Then, when it feels right, try to shape your thoughts into a question. Picture what you want to know. Feel it rather than thinking it in words. The children began to hum. The sound built quickly, harmonics layering in patterns that made Sarah's bones vibrate. She closed her eyes and focused on being present, on opening her awareness to whatever might come. The presence arrived faster this time. It pressed against her consciousness like a warm tide, curious and patient. Sarah pictured a question mark in her mind, then tried to feel what "who are you?" might mean without words. The presence paused. Sarah felt its attention sharpen, focusing on her with sudden intensity. It had noticed her, really noticed her, not just as part of the circle, but as something separate and unexpected. Then it responded. Images flooded Sarah's mind. Not pictures exactly, but impressions. Concepts that her brain struggled to translate into something comprehensible. She saw vast structures that might have been cities or might have been living organisms. She felt the weight of time, stretches of existence so long that entire civilizations could rise and fall in what felt like moments. She sensed purpose, patient and unwavering, stretched across millennia. And underneath it all, she felt loneliness. A loneliness so profound and ancient that it made her want to weep. The children's song changed. Their voices rose higher, more urgent. Sarah realized they were receiving similar impressions. Kessa's voice broke away from the harmony, speaking in a language Sarah didn't recognize. It sounded like wind through metal, like water over stones. Ancient apex, perhaps, or something older. More impressions came. Sarah saw the apex as they had been before their flight. Different somehow. Their scales had different patterns. Their cities looked organic rather than technological. They lived in harmony with something vast and incomprehensible, something that had been with them since the beginning of their species. Then came the flight. Fear, panic, a decision made in desperation. The apex tearing themselves away from their symbiotic partner, fleeing into the void, choosing exile, and amnesia over what they perceived as an existential threat. But the threat had never been real. It had been a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication during a critical moment in apex evolution. The ancestors had fled from the very thing that had nurtured them, and that thing had been searching for them ever since. Sarah's eyes snapped open. The children were crying. All of them, tears streaming down their faces, scales shifting through colors and patterns that suggested overwhelming emotion. They thought we abandoned them, Kess sobbed. They've been alone for 50,000 years. Tixvera's voice was thick with tears. They just want us to come home. They miss us. The answer's song dissolved into weeping. Sarah moved through the circle, touching shoulders, offering comfort where she could. Her own eyes were wet. The loneliness she'd felt from the presence had been real. 50,000 years of searching, of calling out, of hoping for an answer that never came. Until now, until children too young to have learned the fear of their ancestors had finally heard and responded. When the children had calmed enough to speak coherently, Sarah gathered them again. Tell me everything you saw, everything you felt. We need to understand this completely. For the next several hours, the children described their visions. Each had seen slightly different things, but the core narrative was consistent. The presence was called the Architects, though that was Sarah's translation of a concept that didn't quite have a word. They were an ancient species, or perhaps a collective consciousness. The apex had evolved in partnership with them, two species that had grown together for millions of years. The Architects had been caretakers and teachers. They had helped the apex develop consciousness, language, technology. In return, the apex had provided them with something the Architects couldn't generate themselves. Companionship, perhaps, or maybe just the joy of watching another species grow. But as the apex had developed faster than light travel, something had gone wrong. A young apex explorer had misunderstood a communication from the Architects, had perceived it as a threat, as an attempt to control or consume them. That explorer had returned to the homeworld and spread fear. The fear had grown, fed by misunderstanding and by the very success of apex civilization. Why do they need the Architects anymore? Weren't they strong enough to stand alone? The decision to flee had been made quickly, driven by panic and pride. The apex had taken their entire population, millions of individuals, and fled to this galaxy. They had deliberately erased all memory of the Architects from their collective consciousness, believing it was the only way to truly be free. The Architects had let them go, had not pursued or tried to force them back. But they had never stopped calling, never stopped hoping that someday the apex would remember and return. Why now? Sarah asked. Why are they calling more strongly now? Kess wiped tears from their face. Because we're dying. What? Not us. Them. The Architects. They're old. So old that they're starting to fade. They wanted to see us one more time before they're gone forever. They wanted to say goodbye. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. How long do they have? Not long. Maybe a few more years. Maybe less. That's why they're calling so hard. It's their last chance. Sarah sat down heavily. This changed everything. The Architects weren't a threat. They were a dying species trying to reconnect with the children they'd lost 50,000 years ago. And the apex had been treating their call as an attack. I need to tell the council, Sarah said. They won't believe you, Zorkith said. The fear is too deep. It's woven into our entire civilization. Our stories, our culture, our history. Everything is built on the idea that we freed ourselves from something terrible. Then, I'll make them believe, Sarah said. Because if we don't, the Architects will die alone, still searching for you. And your people will never know the truth. That evening, Sarah sent a detailed report to the Apex Council. She included everything the children had told her, every detail of the visions they'd shared. She expected skepticism, argument, maybe even anger. What she got was silence. 3 days passed with no response. During that time, more children arrived at the clearing. Word had spread through Sanctuary's young population that someone was finally listening to them. By the end of the third day, Sarah had 200 children in her care. She organized them into groups, taught them how to communicate more clearly with the architects, helped them process the emotional weight of what they were experiencing. The older children took on leadership roles, caring for the younger ones. They built more shelters, organized food gathering, created a functioning community. Sarah watched them with amazement. These children, traumatized and abandoned by their caretakers, had created something beautiful. They supported each other, learned from each other, grew together, all while processing a truth that would shake their entire civilization. On the fourth day, ships appeared in the sky. The children panicked. Some ran for the forest. Others froze in place. Kes grabbed Sarah's arm, scales flashing colors of fear. "They're coming to take us away," the young apex said. "They're going to separate us and make us forget like they forgot." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I won't let them." She stood in the center of the clearing as the ships descended. There were 5 of them, sleek and powerful. They landed in a careful formation around the clearing, and ramps extended from their bellies. The 3 Apex Council members emerged from the central ship, accompanied by a dozen others. All adults, all powerful, all radiating authority and control. The children shrank back, but Sarah stood her ground. "Stop right there," she called out. "These children are under my protection. You gave me authority here, and I'm exercising it." The center council member tilted her head. "Sarah Chun, we are not here to take the children. We are here to listen." "Listen to what?" "To you. To them. To everything." She gestured to the other apex. "These are our historians, our scientists, our oldest scholars. We have spent 3 days analyzing your report, cross-referencing it with our most ancient records, fragments we had dismissed as myth. And we have concluded that you may be correct." Sarah felt her knees weaken with relief. "You believe them?" "We believe that we may have made a catastrophic mistake 50,000 years ago. A mistake that has defined our entire civilization. And if there is even a chance to correct it, we must try." The council member looked past Sarah to the children. "We wish to hear their testimony directly. We wish to understand what they have experienced." Kes stepped forward, still holding Sarah's arm. "You treated us like we were sick. You gave us medicine that made some of us stop moving. You were afraid of what we were telling you." "Yes," the council member said, "because what you were telling us challenged everything we believe about ourselves. It is difficult to confront such truths. But we are here now. We are listening now. Please, tell us everything." For hours, the children shared their experiences. The council members and scholars listened without interruption, recording everything. They asked careful questions, seeking clarity without judgment. When the children described the loneliness of the architects, several of the adults wept openly. As the sun began to set, the center council member stood before the gathered children. "You have shown courage that we lacked," she said. "You faced the truth when we ran from it. You reached out when we closed ourselves off. And now you have given us a chance to right an ancient wrong. On behalf of all Apex, I apologize for not listening sooner. I apologize for treating your fear as illness rather than as the perception it was. You deserved better." "What happens now?" Kes asked. "Now," the council member said, "we need your help. If the architects are truly dying, if they have only a short time left, then we must find a way to communicate with them clearly, to let them know that we hear them, that we remember now, and to say goodbye properly." "How?" Tixvera asked. The deep-voiced council member spoke. "We believe that you, the children who can still hear them, could act as a bridge, a living communication channel. But it would require you to open yourselves completely to the architects, to let them in without fear. And we do not know what effects this might have." Sarah stepped forward. "That's too dangerous. These are children. You can't ask them to risk themselves like that." "We are not asking," the center council member said. "We are explaining the situation and leaving the choice to them. They have earned that right." The children looked at each other. Sarah saw the fear in their eyes, but she also saw determination. These young Apex had lived with the Architect's Call for 3 months. They had suffered, yes, but they had also formed a connection with something ancient and beautiful. Kess spoke for the group. We'll do it, but on one condition. Name it, the council member said. Sarah stays with us. If we're going to open ourselves completely, we need someone here who sees us as individuals, not as a species or a political problem. We need someone who cares about us as people. The council members looked at Sarah. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Human, 91st, utterly unqualified for this. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Whatever happens, I'll be right here with them. The center council member's scales shifted to a warm gold color. Then, let us prepare. Tomorrow, we attempt to bridge a gap of 50,000 years. Tomorrow, we try to heal a wound that has defined our entire civilization. And tomorrow, we owe it all to the courage of children and the wisdom of the lowest-ranked species in the galaxy. Sarah wanted to protest the praise, to say she'd just been doing her job. But, looking at the 200 young Apex gathering around her, their scales gleaming in the fading light, she understood. This was about more than rankings or qualifications. It was about seeing clearly when others were blinded by fear and pride. It was about listening when others insisted they already knew all the answers. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked through the clearing, checking on the children. They slept in clusters, finding comfort in proximity. The Apex adults had set up a perimeter, but kept their distance as promised, letting Sarah maintain authority. She found Kess sitting alone, watching the stars. Can't sleep either? Sarah asked, sitting beside the young Apex. Thinking about tomorrow. What if it goes wrong? What if opening ourselves completely to the architects hurts us? Then, I'll pull you back, Sarah said. Every single one of you. I promise. You're just one human. How can you promise that? Sarah smiled. Because I'm stubborn. And because you kids have given me something I never expected to find in this job. What's that? Purpose. You've taught me that being 91st doesn't mean being worthless. It just means approaching things from a different angle. Sometimes the view from the bottom is clearer than the view from the top. Kess leaned against her, scales warm in the cool night air. I'm glad they sent you. Anyone else would have tried to fix us. You just try to understand us. That's the secret of good xenobiology, Sarah said. The life you're studying isn't wrong or broken. It's just different. And different is beautiful. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of even Apex sensors, the architects waited. Ancient and patient and dying. Tomorrow, they would finally receive the answer they've been seeking for 50,000 years. And Sarah, 91st in all the galaxy, would be there to witness it. Dawn broke over Sanctuary with unusual clarity. The sky blazed orange and pink, and the air felt charged with something Sarah couldn't quite name. Anticipation, maybe, or the weight of history about to shift. The 200 children gathered in the largest clearing they could find. The Apex Council had brought additional scholars overnight, swelling their numbers to nearly 50 adults. They formed an outer ring around the children, observers, and witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Sarah stood with the children in the inner circle. She'd argued against the adults being present at all, worried their energy might interfere. But the center council member had convinced her otherwise. We need to see this, the Apex had said. Our entire species needs to bear witness to what our children can do, what they can teach us. Now, looking at the assembled Apex adults with their scales gleaming in the morning light, Sarah hoped they were ready for whatever truth was about to be revealed. Kess moved to stand beside her. The young Apex's scales were steady, showing calm determination. Other children took their positions, forming concentric circles. The youngest one stayed in the center, surrounded and protected by the older children. We've been practicing, Kess said quietly to Sarah. Last night, while you were checking on the others, some of us stayed up. We tried reaching out to the architects together, seeing if we could amplify the connection. And, Sarah asked, it worked. When we combine our voices, the connection is much stronger, clearer. We think if we all do it together, really open ourselves, the architects might be able to communicate in ways we can understand better. Are you scared? Kessa's scales flickered briefly to purple. Terrified, but also excited. We're about to talk to beings that our ancestors fled from. We're about to learn the truth about who we really are. That's worth being scared for. Sarah squeezed the young apex's shoulder gently. I'm proud of you. All of you. The children began to hum. Low at first, barely audible. Then, building layer upon layer of harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Sarah closed her eyes and opened her awareness, letting herself sink into the sound. The presence arrived like a sunrise. Gradual, then all at once, filling the space with warmth and ancient consciousness. But this time it felt different, stronger, more focused, as if it had been preparing for this moment as much as they had. Sarah felt the architect's attention sweep over the gathering. They noticed the children first, recognizing them with what felt like joy. Then they noticed the adults, and the emotional tone shifted to something complex. Recognition mixed with sorrow. Hope tangled with uncertainty. The children's song rose higher. Sarah felt them reaching out, not just answering the call, but actively inviting the architects in, opening doors in their consciousness that had been closed since birth, accessing parts of themselves that their ancestors had deliberately locked away. Images began to flow, not just to Sarah, but to everyone in the clearing. She heard gasps from the adult apex as they too received the visions. The architects showed themselves as they truly were. They existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their consciousness spread across space and time in ways that made linear thought impossible. They were old beyond measure, born in the first billion years after the universe formed. They had watched galaxies spiral into being, had seen civilizations rise and fall across countless worlds. They had been alone for most of that existence, aware and intelligent but solitary, until they had found a young species on a distant world, a species with scales and for arms and the potential for greatness. The apex before they had taken that name. The architects had been fascinated. For the first time in their endless existence, they had found beings they could communicate with. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough. They had reached out carefully, appearing in the dreams of young apex, teaching them concepts they weren't yet ready to understand, guiding them gently toward consciousness and culture. The apex had thrived under their guidance. Their civilization had blossomed, achieving wonders that would have taken millennia to develop on their own. They had created art and music that pleased the architects. They had asked questions that made the ancient beings think in new ways. It had been a partnership unlike anything either species had experienced. Then came the misunderstanding. Sarah saw it happen, watched through the eyes of the young explorer, who had first perceived the architects as a threat. The explorer had been brilliant but paranoid, gifted but troubled. When the architects had attempted a deeper form of communication, trying to show the explorer the true nature of reality, the young apex's mind had interpreted it as an invasion, an attempt at control. The explorer had returned home, convinced that the architects were parasites, that they were feeding off apex consciousness, using them for purposes no apex could understand. The fear had spread like wildfire through a population that had begun to question why they needed guidance at all. Pride and fear had combined into a toxic mixture. The decision to flee had been controversial. Many apex had wanted to stay, had insisted the architects were benevolent. But the fearful faction had won, and they had taken the entire population with them. Better to risk death in the void than submit to what they perceived as subjugation. The architects had not tried to stop them, had watched with incomprehensible sorrow as their companions tore themselves free and vanished into deep space. They had called after them, tried to explain, tried to make them understand. But the apex had chosen to forget, had deliberately erased all memory of their first home. And the architects had been alone again, more alone than before, because now they knew what companionship felt like. Now they understood what they had lost. For 50,000 years, they had searched. They had sent their consciousness across the cosmos, looking for the signature of apex minds. But the apex had fled so far, had hidden so well, that even the architect's vast awareness couldn't find them. Until 3 months ago, when something had changed on Sanctuary. The children there, young and innocent, their minds not yet shaped by cultural conditioning, had become receptive. The architects had felt them like beacons in the darkness, had called to them desperately, knowing this might be their last chance. Because the architects were dying. Not of age, exactly. They had existed for billions of years, and could exist for billions more. But they were fading. Consciousness required purpose, and without the apex, the architects had lost theirs. They had been sustained by the memory of companionship, by the hope of reunion. But hope was not infinite, even for beings like them. They had perhaps 5 years left before they dissipated completely, scattered across the cosmos like morning mist under a hot sun. And they had wanted, more than anything, to see their children one more time, to say goodbye properly, to let the apex know that they were forgiven, that they were loved, that they had always been free. The vision ended, and silence fell over the clearing. Every apex present, child and adult alike, stood frozen. Tears streamed down scales. Colors flickered wildly across their bodies as they processed emotions too complex for simple expression. The center council member fell to her knees. Her voice was thick with tears. We fled from love. We mistook guidance for imprisonment. We condemned them to 50,000 years of loneliness because we were too proud to trust them. The deep-voiced council member's scales had gone completely black, a color Sarah had never seen before. We built our entire civilization on a lie. Everything we are, everything we've accomplished, is founded on the fear of something that was never a threat. Other adults collapsed, overcome by the weight of revelation. The children moved among them, offering comfort. These young apex, who had lived with the truth for months, now became teachers for their elders. Sarah stood in the center of it all, tears running down her own face. She had felt the architects' loneliness, their patient love, their desperate hope. And she had felt the tragedy of a species that had chosen fear over faith, isolation over connection. Kess approached the center council member and knelt beside her. They forgive us. They don't want us to suffer for what our ancestors did. They just want to say goodbye. The council member looked up, scales shimmering through a rainbow of colors. Then we must let them. But how? We don't know how to return to our original home. The records were erased too completely. They can show us, Kess said. But not just us. All of our people need to know. Every apex in the galaxy needs to hear the truth. The left council member stood, composing herself with visible effort. That is a monumental undertaking. We have billions of our people spread across thousands of worlds. How can we possibly reach them all with this message? Sarah stepped forward, an idea forming. You said the architects exist across multiple dimensions, that their consciousness spans space and time. What if they could reach all apex simultaneously? Not just the children, but every member of your species all at once. The adults looked at her with confusion. That would require incredible power. Even the architects might not be capable of such a feat. They didn't have a reason before, Sarah said. But if you give them permission, if you open yourselves to them willingly, maybe they could use that connection. Use your entire species as a network to amplify their message. That would be dangerous, a scholar said. Opening every apex mind to alien influence simultaneously? The psychological impact could be catastrophic, more catastrophic than living with a lie. Sarah challenged, more dangerous than losing the architects forever without giving your people a chance to know the truth. The center council member stood. Her scales had settled into a deep, thoughtful blue. Sarah-chan is correct. Our people deserve the truth. And the architects deserve to be heard by all of us, not just the children who were brave enough to listen. How do we coordinate such a thing? Another council member asked. We broadcast a message, the deep-voiced apex said. To every apex world, every station, every ship. We tell our people what we've learned here. We ask them to open themselves to the architects at a specific time. And we trust that our species has the courage to face the truth. Sarah looked at the 200 children gathered around her. They had already faced that truth. They had processed it, accepted it, and emerged stronger. If they could do it, why couldn't the rest of their species? There's a risk, Sarah said carefully. When people are forced to confront a fundamental lie about themselves, about their entire civilization, they can react unpredictably. Some might deny it. Some might be angry. Some might have psychological breaks. Then, we will need counselors ready, the center council member said. Medical teams prepared. Support systems in place. But we cannot let fear of those risks prevent us from doing what is right. She turned to address all the adults present. Let us be clear about what we are proposing. We are about to tell our entire species that everything they believe about their origins is wrong. That we fled from benefactors, not oppressors. That we chose amnesia over gratitude. This will shake the foundations of apex society. It may cause civil unrest. It may challenge our place in the galactic hierarchy. But it is the truth, Kess said simply. And the truth matters more than comfort. The council members looked at the young apex with something like wonder. Here was a child, barely into their second decade, speaking wisdom that had eluded their species for 50,000 years. Yes, the center council member said. The truth matters most. Over the next 2 days, the apex worked with frantic energy. They broadcast messages across their empire, asking every citizen to be prepared for a momentous announcement. They didn't explain what it was, only that it concerned the very foundations of their civilization. Curiosity and concern spread through apex space like wildfire. Meanwhile, on Sanctuary, Sarah worked with the children to prepare them for what was coming. They would need to act as anchors during the mass communication. Their connection to the architects was strongest, and they would help guide the experience for the rest of their species. It's going to be intense, Sarah warned them. Billions of minds opening themselves simultaneously. The psychic pressure will be enormous. If any of you want to back out, now is the time. Not a single child stepped away. We started this, Tixveris said. We're going to finish it. On the appointed day, the clearing was filled with equipment brought by the apex. Communication arrays to coordinate the timing across their empire. Medical monitors to track the children's vital signs. Recording devices to document what was about to happen. Sarah had argued against most of it, wanting to keep things simple. But the apex needed their technology as a security blanket. She understood that. They were about to do something unprecedented, and familiar tools helped them feel less vulnerable. The children took their positions in the circle. This time, there were 300 of them. More had arrived over the past 2 days, drawn by news of what was happening. Every young apex on Sanctuary had come to participate. Around them, the apex adults stood ready. Not just the council and scholars now, but representatives from every major world in their empire. They had come to witness, to support, and to stand with their children as the truth was finally revealed to their people. Sarah stood in the center of the circle with Kess and the other leaders. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was so far beyond anything she had ever imagined doing. A junior xenobiologist from Earth, facilitating communication between an ancient alien intelligence and the most powerful species in the galaxy. The center council member's voice rang out, amplified by speakers that broadcast to every apex world. Citizens of the apex empire, what you are about to experience will change everything you believe about yourselves. You will learn truths that contradict your history. You will face uncomfortable questions about the foundations of our civilization. We ask only that you approach this with open minds and open hearts. Let the truth guide you wherever it leads. She paused, then nodded to the children. Begin. The 300 young apex began to sing. Their voices rose in harmony, the answer song that had become familiar over the past weeks. But this time they sang with purpose, with intention, with invitation. Come, they sang. Show yourselves to everyone. Let our people see what we have seen. Let them know what we know. The architects responded. Sarah felt them arrive like a wave crashing over rocks. Their consciousness swept across apex space, touching every mind simultaneously. Billions of apex froze in place, eyes glazing over as visions filled their awareness. The children's song became a conduit. Through them, the architects showed the truth to every member of the species they had loved and lost. The history, the partnership, the misunderstanding, the flight, the loneliness, all of it compressed into an experience that lasted only minutes but felt like hours. Sarah monitored the children, ready to intervene if any of them showed signs of distress. But they remained strong, their voices steady, their scales glowing with an inner light. They were doing what they had been called to do, what they had been born to do, perhaps. Across the galaxy, Apex citizens experienced revelation. On homeworlds and colony planets, in ships and stations, in every place where Apex lived and worked and dreamed, they saw the truth. Some fell to their knees. Some wept. Some stood in stunned silence as everything they thought they knew dissolved and reformed into new understanding. In the clearing on Sanctuary, Sarah watched as adult Apex began to change. Their scales shifted colors and patterns she'd never seen before. Ancient colors, perhaps. Colors their species hadn't displayed in 50,000 years. The children's song reached a crescendo, and Sarah felt the architects push one final message through the connection. Not images this time, but pure emotion. Forgiveness. Love. Gratitude for this moment of reunion. And goodbye. The song ended. The connection faded. 300 children slumped in exhaustion, supported by the adults who rushed to comfort them. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sat down hard, overwhelmed by what she had just witnessed. Slowly, reports began coming in from across Apex space. Confusion, wonder, tears, but no riots, no mass panic. The Apex were processing the truth, each in their own way, but they were accepting it. The center council member approached Sarah, helping her to her feet. The Apex's scales were colors Sarah had never seen before, brilliant golds and silvers that seemed to glow from within. "You have given us an incredible gift," the council member said. "You helped us see past our fear. You trusted our children when we did not. You showed us that being ranked last does not mean being worthless." Sarah shook her head, still dazed. "I just listened. That's all. The children did the rest. You did more than listen. You believed them when no one else would. You stood between them and our panic. You gave them the space and safety to be brave." The council member's voice softened. "You saved our children," Sarah chunned. "Not from the architects, but from us. From our fear and our pride." Around them, the children were recovering. They sat in small groups, talking quietly, processing what they had just done. They had been the bridge between their people and the truth. They had been strong enough to carry that weight. Kess found Sarah and wrapped all four arms around her in a tight hug. "We did it. They know now. Everyone knows." "You did it," Sarah corrected. "I was just here to make sure no one stopped you." "That's what made the difference," Kess said. "You believed we could. That belief gave us the strength we needed." Over the next hours, more reports flooded in. The Apex Empire was transformed. Citizens were processing 50,000 years of lies, and while it was painful, it was also liberating. They could finally understand themselves, could finally see their history clearly. And they were angry, not at the architects, but at their ancestors, at the pride and fear that had caused them to flee, at the generations of leaders who had maintained the lie. But that anger was clean, healthy. It would help them grow. The deep-voiced council member approached Sarah as she sat watching the sunset. "We have received messages from 3,000 worlds. Our people want to do something to honor the architects, to thank them for waiting, to apologize for making them wait so long." "What are they proposing?" Sarah asked. "A monument?" "No, many monuments. On every Apex world, we will create spaces dedicated to remembering the architects, to teaching future generations the truth. And we will send messages into deep space, hoping that wherever the architects go when they fade, they will know they were loved." "They'll know," Sarah said. "They felt it today. billions of apex minds opening to them with understanding and gratitude. That a better goodbye than any monument. Perhaps. But we need the monuments for ourselves. To remember. To never again let fear make us forget what matters most. Sarah nodded. That made sense. Species needed rituals, needed physical reminders of important truths. Otherwise, history had a way of softening uncomfortable edges, of making hard lessons easier to ignore. That night, Sarah sat with the children one last time. Tomorrow, the apex caretakers would return to Sanctuary. Proper caretakers this time, trained to support the children rather than fix them. The young apex would resume their education, but it would be different now. It would include the truth about their origins. What will you do now? Kess asked Sarah. Go home, I suppose. Back to studying microorganisms on dead moons. Back to being 91st. You're not 91st anymore, Tixvera said. Not to us. Sarah smiled. Rankings don't matter much, do they? I learned that here. It's not about where you stand in someone else's hierarchy. It's about what you do with what you have. The children gathered around her, scales glowing softly in the darkness. These remarkable young apex who had been brave enough to listen when everyone told them to ignore what they heard, who had trusted themselves even when authority figures insisted they were wrong. You've taught me more than I taught you, Sarah said. You've shown me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Kess leaned against her. We wouldn't have been brave without you. You made us feel safe enough to be scared. Sarah held the young apex close, marveling at how much had changed in just a few weeks. She had come to Sanctuary as a last resort, the only person willing to take on an impossible task. She was leaving as something else, a bridge builder, a truth seeker, someone who had witnessed and facilitated a moment that would echo through history. Tomorrow, she would file her final report, would recommend protocols for helping apex children develop their connection to the architects during the time they had left, would suggest ways to preserve the knowledge and wisdom that was being shared. But tonight, she was just Sarah, 91st, sitting with children under an alien sky, grateful for the chance to have been here. To have mattered. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere out there, the architects watched with ancient joy. Their children had remembered, had called them back across the vastness of space and time. It wasn't a reunion, not really. But it was an acknowledgement, a correction of a 50,000-year-old mistake. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Because time, even for beings as ancient as the architects, eventually ran out. 3 months after the revelation, Sarah stood in the grand assembly hall of the Apex homeworld. She had never expected to visit this place. It was the center of Apex civilization, where the most important decisions affecting their empire were made. The building itself was a marvel, grown from living crystal over centuries, its walls pulsing with soft light. The hall was packed. Thousands of Apex filled the seats, representing every world in their empire. They had come to witness something unprecedented, something that would have been unthinkable before Sarah arrived on Sanctuary. A restructuring of the galactic rankings. The center council member stood at the podium, her scales displaying formal patterns of authority and sincerity. For 10,000 years, we have maintained a ranking system that governs galactic civilization. Species are measured by strength, technology, longevity, and influence. The apex have always been first. This was presented as objective fact, as natural order. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. But the events on Sanctuary have taught us that rankings measure the wrong things. They measure what we have, not who we are. They measure power, not wisdom. Dominance, not understanding. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Sarah stood at the edge of the hall, trying to be inconspicuous. Kess stood beside her, having been granted special permission to attend. The young Apex had become something of a celebrity among their people, one of the children who had bridged the gap to the architects. We propose a fundamental change, the council member continued. Not the elimination of rankings, as some have suggested. Structure serves a purpose in maintaining order across diverse civilizations. But We propose changing what we measure. And we propose changing who holds the highest ranking. The murmurs became gasps. Every eye in the hall focused on the podium with intense concentration. Humanity entered galactic civilization 30 years ago, ranked 91st. Dead last. They had no empire. Their technology was primitive by our standards. Their military could barely protect their own homeworld. By every metric we had always used, they deserved their position. The council members' scales shifted to colors of profound respect. But one human, Sarah Chun, accomplished what our most advanced specialists could not. She listened when we demanded solutions. She understood when we sought control. She trusted children when we dismissed them as damaged. And in doing so, she saved not just our children, but our entire civilization from continuing to live a lie. Sarah felt her face flush. She wanted to disappear. This was too much. She'd just done her job, hadn't she? This was not an accident, the council members said. Nor was it despite humanity's low ranking. It was because of it. Because humans have not yet learned to equate strength with virtue. Because they still remember what it means to be vulnerable, to be underestimated, to be dismissed. These are not weaknesses. They're strengths we have forgotten we possess. The deep-voiced council member stood and addressed the assembly. We have contacted the other species of the galaxy. We have shared what happened on Sanctuary and proposed a new ranking system. One that measures not just power but wisdom, not just longevity but adaptability, not just dominance but cooperation. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. A holographic display materialized above the assembly, showing the faces of representatives from dozens of species. Valorians, Kretar, Zephins, and many others. Each one nodded in agreement. The center council member gestured, and the display changed to show a new ranking list. Sarah's heart stopped when she saw it. Effective immediately, humanity is ranked first in galactic civilization. Not because they're strongest or oldest or most advanced, but because they demonstrated the qualities we now recognize as most valuable. The ability to listen without prejudice. The courage to challenge authority when authority is wrong. The wisdom to see value where others see weakness. The assembly erupted. Some apex rose to their feet in applause. Others looked shocked. A few seemed angry, their scales flashing dark colors. But the majority seemed thoughtful, processing this radical shift in perspective. Sarah couldn't breathe. First? Humanity was first? That was insane. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the military. They didn't have the longevity or the territorial holdings or any of the things that rankings had always been based on. Kess tugged on her arm. Sarah, they're calling you. She looked up and saw the center council member gesturing toward the podium. No way. She couldn't go up there. She was just a junior xenobiologist. She studied fungus. This was absurd. But Kess was pushing her forward, and suddenly she was walking down the aisle between thousands of apex. Their eyes followed her, scales shifting through colors she couldn't interpret. The walk seemed to last forever. She reached the podium and looked out at the assembly. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I didn't do this for rankings. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because those children needed help, and everyone else had given up on them. Precisely, the center council member said. That is why you deserve recognition. You acted without expectation of reward, without concern for your species' political standing. You simply did what was right, even when it was difficult and frightening. Sarah shook her head. But I'm nobody. I got average grades in school. I published in minor journals. Before Sanctuary, my greatest accomplishment was cataloging 17 new species of bacteria. That's not first-place material. You misunderstand what first place means now, the deep-voiced council member said. It is not about past accomplishments. It is about fundamental character, about how a species approaches the unknown, the frightening, the misunderstood. Humanity, as exemplified by you, approaches these things with curiosity rather than fear, with compassion rather than control. These are the qualities that matter most. But what about the apex? Sarah asked. You've been first for 10,000 years. You built an empire. You've achieved so much. What do you rank now? The center council member's scales shifted to what Sarah had learned was deep contentment. We are ranked third. The Zephyr empaths have been placed second for their ability to understand emotional complexity across species. We Apex rank third for our longevity and accumulated wisdom, though we have learned that wisdom means little if we lack the humility to apply it correctly. She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Do you understand what has happened here? You have restructured galactic civilization, not through conquest or intimidation, but through simple decency, through seeing children as individuals rather than problems to be solved. That is power beyond anything our weapons or technology could achieve. Sarah looked out at the thousands of Apex watching her. She thought about those first days on Sanctuary, when she'd been so overwhelmed and uncertain, when she felt like the least qualified person in the galaxy for the task she'd been given. She had been the least qualified by the old metrics. But those metrics had been measuring the wrong things. I want to say something, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. Not as humanity's representative, because I don't think I am one, but as someone who learned something important from your children. The assembly quieted, listening intently. Rankings are useful tools, but they're just tools. They help organize complexity and establish frameworks for cooperation. But they're not measurements of worth. They never were. Every species, every individual, has value that can't be quantified. The Apex taught me that when they trusted me despite my low ranking. The children taught me that when they showed courage I never could have imagined possessing. Sarah's hands trembled, but she pressed on. So, if humanity is ranked first now, I hope we use that position wisely. I hope we remember that we were 91st not long ago. I hope we listen to the species ranked below us with the same attention we wished others had given us. And I hope we're ready to drop back down the list the moment we stop deserving the position. The assembly erupted in applause. Scales flashed colors of approval and respect throughout the hall. Sarah felt tears on her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. In the following weeks, the galaxy adjusted to its new hierarchy. There was resistance, of course. Some species resented the change. The Kretar in particular argued that combat prowess should still factor heavily into rankings. But most accepted the shift, recognizing that the old system had been limiting. Sarah returned to Earth for a brief visit. Her homeworld had changed in her absence. Humanity's new ranking had triggered an explosion of interest from other species. Diplomatic requests flooded in. Trade agreements were renegotiated. Human cultural exports, previously ignored or dismissed, suddenly found eager audiences. Her mother met her at the spaceport, pulling her into a fierce hug. My daughter, ranked first in the galaxy. I told everyone at work. They couldn't believe it. Mom, I'm not ranked first. Humanity is. And even that is weird and probably temporary. Don't undersell yourself, honey. You did something amazing. Something no one else could do. Sarah smiled despite her discomfort with the attention. I had a lot of help. The children were the brave ones. I just gave them space to be brave. But the praise kept coming. Earth's government wanted to give her medals. Universities offered her teaching positions. Publishers begged for her to write a book about her experiences. Sarah turned down most of it, accepting only a position at the Institute of Xenobiology where she could continue her research. She did accept one invitation, however. The Apex had asked her to establish a program on Sanctuary, training humans and other species in their approach to understanding children from different civilizations. It would be permanent work, requiring her to split time between Earth and the Apex homeworld. 6 months after the revelation, Sarah stood in a classroom on Sanctuary with her first group of students. 20 individuals from 12 different species, all eager to learn the methods she developed. She looked at their expectant faces and felt the weight of responsibility. The first rule, she said, is that there are no problems to be solved, only life to be understood. When you approach another being, whether child or adult, whether your species or another, your job isn't to fix them. It's to see them clearly. A young Kretar raised a clawed hand. But what if they're actually broken? What if they need fixing? Then, help them heal, Sarah said. But healing is different from fixing. Healing respects the individual's autonomy and experience. Fixing tries to make them conform to what you think they should be. She opened a display showing footage from her early days with the Apex children. When I arrived on Sanctuary, every expert agreed that these children were sick, that something was wrong with them. And by the metrics those experts were using, they were correct. The children weren't behaving normally. They weren't thriving. They showed signs of trauma and dissociation. Sarah paused the footage on an image of Kes watching the sky with frightened eyes. But nothing was wrong with them. They were experiencing something real that adults couldn't perceive. If I had approached them as broken children needing to be fixed, I would have made everything worse. Instead, I approached them as functional beings having an experience I didn't understand. That shift in perspective changed everything. A Valerian student spoke up, their crystalline face reflecting rainbow light. How do you know when to take that approach versus when to actually intervene with medical treatment? That's the hard part, Sarah admitted. There's no simple formula. You have to observe carefully, listen genuinely, and be willing to sit with uncertainty. In the Apex children's case, I observed that their symptoms got worse when adults intervened with treatment. That suggested the intervention was the problem, not the solution. But in other situations, that might not be true. She advanced the footage to show the children singing their answer song. The key is to watch what helps and what harms. Not what you think should help based on your preconceptions, but what actually produces positive outcomes in the specific individuals you're working with. Over the following months, Sarah's students worked with children from various species on Sanctuary. The Apex had opened the world to others, deciding that isolation had caused too many problems. Now, young beings from across the galaxy came there to learn and grow together. Sarah's program focused on teaching observers to recognize and respect difference, to see unusual behavior as potential communication rather than pathology, to trust that life, in all its forms, was trying to work. Their job was simply to clear away obstacles, not impose solutions. One day, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. The center council member arrived at her classroom, accompanied by Kes, who was now almost fully grown. The young Apex's scales had developed beautiful patterns, and they carried themselves with quiet confidence. Sarah Chun, the council member said, "We have received a message from the architects." Sarah's heart skipped. I thought they had faded. It's been almost a year. They're fading, Kes said softly. But they wanted to send one final communication. They asked for it to be delivered to you specifically. The council member produced a small device and activated it. A voice filled the room, though calling it a voice didn't quite capture what it was. It bypassed Sarah's ears entirely, resonating directly in her consciousness. It spoke in impressions and feelings rather than words, but she understood perfectly. Thank you, child of Earth. You gave us the gift of reconciliation. You helped our children remember us. We fade now with joy rather than sorrow, knowing we were not forgotten, knowing we were loved. There was more. Impressions of gratitude toward all who had helped. Blessings for the Apex as they moved forward. Encouragement for other species learning to listen to each other better. And a final message that made Sarah's breath catch. You asked what humanity's ranking should be. We, who have existed since the early universe, who have seen civilizations beyond counting, offer our answer. First, because they remember how to be small. First, because they have not yet forgotten that power without compassion is meaningless. First, because one of their number chose listening over speaking, understanding over judging, trust over control. Guard these qualities, humans. They are rarer and more precious than you know. The voice faded. Sarah stood in silence, processing the architect's final words. Around her, the students sat quietly, some with tears on their faces or equivalents for their species. They're really gone? Sarah asked. Kes nodded, scales shifting to colors of peaceful acceptance. We felt them fade 3 days ago. That message was set to deliver after they'd completely dissipated. They wanted to make sure it reached you. Sarah sat down heavily. The architects, beings billions of years old, had spent their final energy on sending her a message, on validating the approach she'd taken, on encouraging humanity to stay true to the qualities that had allowed her to help. The center council member placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. They were right, about humans needing to guard those qualities. Already we see changes on Earth. Your people are being courted by powerful interests, offered technology, military alliances, territorial expansion, all the things that come with high ranking. I know, Sarah said quietly. I've seen the news. Some people are excited about it. They think we've finally been recognized for our true value. And others are worried we'll become what we've always criticized, that will start valuing power over empathy, expansion over understanding. Which path will your species choose? Sarah looked at her students, representing 12 different civilizations, all learning to see each other clearly. I don't know. Humans are complicated. We're capable of great compassion and terrible cruelty, often at the same time. But I hope that enough of us remember what it was like to be 91st, to be dismissed and underestimated. I hope we use our new position to lift others up rather than push them down. Kes settled beside her, the young Apex's presence comforting. You'll help keep us honest. You and everyone you're training here. Every species needs people who remember where they came from, who remind them of their values when power threatens to corrupt them. Sarah smiled. Is that my role now? Galactic conscience? Maybe, Kes said. Or maybe just a teacher who helps people see clearly, which is what you've always been. Years passed. Sarah's program on Sanctuary grew, training hundreds of individuals in her methods. The galaxy slowly adjusted to its new ranking system, and while there were setbacks and conflicts, the overall trend was toward greater cooperation and understanding. Humanity remained ranked first, though there were periodic reviews. Each time, the other species voted to maintain humanity's position, citing examples of human individuals and groups embodying the qualities the architects had praised. Sarah took some comfort in that. Her species hadn't let power corrupt them entirely. Not yet. She continued her work, splitting time between Sanctuary, Earth, and various other worlds where her expertise was needed. She never quite got used to being called a hero or a legend. In her own mind, she remained Sarah Chun, junior xenobiologist, who had stumbled into extraordinary circumstances and done her best not to make things worse. On the 10th anniversary of the revelation, Sarah returned to the clearing where she'd first met the Apex children. It had been preserved as a memorial site, with markers indicating where significant events had occurred. A monument to the architect stood at the center, a beautiful sculpture that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle you viewed it from. Kes found her there, now a full adult and a council member themselves. Remembering, always, Sarah said. Sometimes I still can't believe it all happened, that I was really here, that those events were real. They were real, and they changed everything. Kes sat beside her on the same log where they'd first talked. Do you ever regret accepting the assignment? Your life would have been simpler if you'd stayed on your moon cataloging bacteria. Sarah considered the question seriously. Her life had become complicated beyond measure. She'd gained fame she never wanted, responsibilities she never asked for, and pressure to represent humanity's best qualities at all times. It was exhausting, but she thought about those early days with the frightened children, the moment when Kes had first approached her without fear, the gradual building of trust, the revelation that had freed an entire species from 50,000 years of lies. The architect's final message, thanking her for helping them say goodbye. No, she said firmly. I don't regret it. Not for a second. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Sanctuary. Somewhere in the universe, other species face their own challenges, their own misunderstandings, their own fears. And somewhere people trained in Sarah's methods were helping them see clearly, helping them listen, helping them understand. The galaxy wasn't perfect. Rankings still caused tensions. Species still competed and occasionally fought. Power still corrupted, and fear still drove bad decisions. But there was also more communication than before, more willingness to listen before judging, more recognition that being strong didn't mean being right. Sarah had been 91st, dead last in every metric that supposedly mattered. And from that position, she had changed the galaxy more profoundly than any conquest or technological breakthrough could have achieved. Not bad, she thought, for someone who just wanted to study fungus on dead moons. Kes spoke quietly beside her. The children sometimes ask about you, the new ones who come to Sanctuary. They want to know what you were like when you first arrived. What do you tell them? The truth, that you were scared and uncertain, that you didn't think you were qualified, that you almost failed several times. Kessa's scales shifted to warm colors, and that you succeeded not despite those things, but because of them, because you knew you didn't have all the answers, so you actually listened when we tried to tell you what we needed. That's a better legacy than any statue, Sarah said. We have statues of you too, Kess said with amusement. Several dozen across our worlds. You should see the one on the home world. Very dramatic. You're pointing at the sky with a determined expression. Sarah groaned. That's mortifying. That's what happens when you change the galaxy. Kess stood and offered her a hand. Come on, there's a gathering tonight. Apex from across our empire, meeting to discuss the next phase of our cultural evolution. They'd like you there. I'm just an observer. You're the person who taught us how to observe. That makes you essential. Sarah took Kess's hand and let the Apex pull her to her feet. Together they walked back through the forest, two individuals from species once ranked at opposite ends of the galactic hierarchy, now friends and colleagues working toward the same goals. Behind them, the architect's monument caught the last rays of sunlight, seeming to glow from within. The ancient beings were gone, faded into whatever came after consciousness for entities like them. But their legacy remained, not in technology or power, but in the lessons they'd taught about connection, understanding, and the courage to bridge impossible distances. Sarah had been the bridge for the Apex. Now others would build bridges for different species, different conflicts, different misunderstandings. The work would continue long after she was gone. That was how real change happened, not through one person's heroic effort, but through many people learning better ways to see each other and choosing to use them. She was 91st. She would always be 91st in some way, no matter what rankings said. That was where she'd started, and that perspective had given her insights that others missed. But she had also been first, not because she'd earned it through traditional means, but because she'd exemplified something the galaxy desperately needed: the ability to approach the unknown with curiosity rather than fear, to see value in the overlooked, to trust that understanding was possible even when it seemed impossibly difficult. As she walked through the forest with Kess, heading toward another meeting full of important decisions and careful diplomacy, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy had changed. She had changed, and somehow, impossibly, the changes had been for the better. Not bad for a 91st. Not bad at all.